leave the floor to Asta. With this, I also have to say, unfortunately, I'm going to leave during the middle of this discussion. I have to fly back to Stockholm. So, as I'm not going to say goodbye later, I will say goodbye now. But I'm going to stay on for an hour. With that, Asta.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to everybody. So we have just enjoyed a good lunch, and I think that whatever could be a better topic for this afternoon to keep us awake than roaming. So it's a very up-to-date and relevant topic at the moment. So we have seen that it's been part of the Commission's Connected Continent package. The Parliament has also given its view on it. The Council is currently discussing that, and also we, the regulators, are working on it. So what we will see now, so we will first have the BEREC presentation by Claudi Fauli and Elisabeth Dornetshumer, so they are co-chairs of the BEREC Roaming Expert Working Group. And following this presentation, so we will move to the interventions and presentations by the stakeholders. So we will have 6 presentations, and we will take those in a row. And we will then take the questions and comments after these presentations. So also questions and comments to the BEREC presentation. So, the floor is yours, Claudi and Elisabeth, please.
Hear me? Okay. First of all, thank you everybody for being here, and good afternoon. Also, thank you, Asta, for introducing us. And this presentation is to be carried out by me and Elisabeth, being the co-chairs of the International Roaming Expert Working Group. And then perhaps it would be good to start with a very brief introduction on the context in which BEREC presented these very preliminary findings that are technical preliminary findings as the very first steps for a future opinion of the proposed future of regulatory model for roaming. It is clear that even though the Council has not formed its view yet on their opinion on Roam Like a Home, and in order to have a well-informed discussion between the European Commission and other co-legislators, the Commission has sent a letter to BEREC in order to assess the impact in assessing the state of the wholesale market, as well as the fair use criteria, and then we were working on that both issues, and our preliminary findings that are based on the answers of a questionnaire that we sent to operators as well as to NRAs. And we received a lot of answers from almost 140 operators and all NRAs that are in Europe. I have also to say that we are aware that the document containing these preliminary findings have raised a great expectation on all of you. But it would be good to remark that it has to be considered as it is, as a preliminary findings, as a first steps for a future opinion of BEREC. In that sense, throughout this presentation, there are raised some further questions that are presented, that their intention is to incentivize the debate that comes later, and with the answers to these questions, we can form the formal opinion that BEREC will give in the coming the coming weeks or so. The next one is a kind of disclaimer that it is worth to mention also that these preliminary findings are in line with the previous BEREC opinion on the European Parliament proposal in this matter that it was published in May, and in case of doubt, this preliminary opinion still prevails. Another thing is that at the present stage of the legislative proposal of the single market proposal, there are still so many parameters that are not very clear defined. So, however, BEREC has made some kind of assumptions in order to identify which are the possible risks and trade-off that the introduction of Roam Like a Home can bring to the market. In particular, we considered that it was assumed that the Roam Like a Home was to be applied to all customers and for all types of domestic tariffs and for all regulated roaming services, and also for all customers who periodically traveling abroad. There are other kind of interpretation of this definition of Roam Like a Home, but this was that very considered. Entering into the matter, responses to the BEREC questionnaire revealed that Roam Like a Home bring a range of risk and trade-off to be considered, and it, in particular, as we mentioned before, Roam Like a Home means that it has to be applied the domestic tariff also in the international market. In that sense, the implementation of Roam Like a Home requires a range of risk and trade-off to be considered the moment that the retail prices of a domestic country has to be compared with the wholesale roaming cost of another country, which now in Europe the differences are so significant. So there are operators with very low, there are countries with very low prices, and there are countries with very high wholesale roaming costs. So if for a sustainable introduction of Roam Like a Home, if we don't want that an increase neither in the domestic markets and neither in the visited operators, one important economical principle has to be ensured. That is the one that is in the formula that is represented in the slide. It could be understood that the retail prices for domestic markets must exceed the roaming charges, which in turn must cover also the wholesale roaming cost for the visited network. This very simple equation that could be understood as simple, in reality represents a challenge, because we have to check whether there is a condition in the formula that allows wholesale charges that that are sufficiently low to allow also Roam Like a Home for a fair use without requiring increases in the domestic market, and also sufficiently high to allow cost recovery for a visited networks, and also without distorting the national wholesale markets. Then the next step that we performed was to analyze whether the operators were able to offer roam like a home on a sustainable basis. And the result of the BEREC study revealed that currently, the average domestic retail prices are below the wholesale caps in most countries. This is especially the case for data services, and as a result, it may imply that a large number of operators would not be able to offer roam like a home on a sustainable basis. And in turn, it would imply that those domestic operators have to increase their domestic price, which is called the waterjet effect in the domestic countries. In the end, it would mean that a large group of customers who never travels or seldom travels abroad are the ones who would subsidize the customers who more frequently travel abroad. So the waterjet effect would affect to all customers, but who were more affected would be the ones who never travel abroad. The fair use policies at the retail level and the review of the wholesale market could be a solution in order to reduce this risk in this situation. Then, sorry, it was the slide in that case. Then we analyzed the wholesale market issues, and in order to find whether there is a condition in the formula that could solve this problem, and we found that there were several risks when we move the wholesale caps high or in a lower level. If we set the caps in a lower level, we have to take into account that the wholesale costs vary from country to country due to differences in geographic conditions. The licensee prices are not the same, and also the labor costs are not the same, whereas the wholesale caps are set in a uniform basis across Europe. In that sense, if the wholesale caps are set below the maximum cost, it could be the risk that some operators could not recover the cost for providing the wholesale roaming services. Another risk is the indirect regulation of Market 15. It means that the combination of the low wholesale prices together with the access obligation of the current roaming regulation could bring to arbitrage opportunity to third parties bypassing the currently MVNO's domestic wholesale access agreement in a better condition of the current MVNOs in the domestic markets. And another issue is the incentive to invest in a specific touristic spot. It is anticipated that the roam like a home may incentivize the demand and in specific geographic areas. So the investment in these specific areas may have a longer period of return of investment due to the roaming users only stay in these places for several months, not all the year, and depending on the level of the wholesale caps, operators would not have incentive to invest for only three or 4 months a year. All this may lead to increases in the retail prices in the visited countries. As we said before, that it could be lead to increases in the prices in the domestic networks. In this case, it would lead to increases in prices in the visited networks and the distortion in the national wholesale markets. There is the risk about indirect regulation of Market 15 could be mitigated by the introduction of fair use policies, in this case at the wholesale level, but it would need further analysis and whether even if this additional measure should be introduced or not. On the other hand, there are also risks for setting high wholesale caps. As we have seen before, operators are not be able to provide roam like a home on a sustainable basis without fair use policies at the retail level, and it may be particularly the case for smaller operators who are not able to steer traffic on their own networks in other countries, and hence they cannot internalize the wholesale cost. So these smaller operators could be put in a competitive disadvantage in comparison with multinational operators and in the retail market, of course. Another thing is the variation, as we mentioned before, the variation in the retail market between one country with very low retail prices and another country with high retail prices could lead to permanent roaming in some countries, and depending on the level of the wholesale caps, if wholesale caps are high, it could lead to losses for domestic operators. In that case, wholesale caps would lead to risk of increases of the prices in the domestic markets, and in this case, fair use policies at the retail level could be a remedy to reduce this risk. And then this is a graph that summarizes all the risk, and Elisabeth, please, could be summarized.
Yes, we prepared one slide to summarize all these risks and challenges that are associated with implementing Roam Like at Home. So on the left-hand side, you can see the relation between the wholesale roaming costs, the MVNO access prices, and the retail domestic prices. The lower the wholesale caps is, it could end up in a situation where the cap is set at a level which is below the roaming costs for providing the wholesale roaming service, which lead, as just said, to negative effects or in the visited country. These are waterbed effects, for example, undermining network investments, etc. If prices are set or if wholesale caps are set at a level which are below the MVNO access prices, this could lead to indirect regulation of Market 15, a loss of income for MVNOs, also potential waterbed effects, risks, etc. But on the other hand, if the wholesale cap is set above the retail prices, the domestic retail prices in a number of countries, this might have other effects, namely this affects the domestic country in the domestic market in the home country. These risks are, as already mentioned before, margin squeeze situation for roaming services, waterbed effects, permanent roaming driven by differences in retail prices, etc., etc. Now I would like to present the first set of questions with regard to the wholesale market issues. We would like to know from you and from the stakeholders if you consider that any wholesale measures are needed. This also includes a reduction of the wholesale caps. Furthermore, we would like to know if you consider that any additional measures are needed to limit the likely negative effects on national markets. Such measures could, for example, be fair use policies at the wholesale level. Furthermore, we would like to know if there are any restrictions to implement such measures. The next part is about the termination of regulated roaming calls. One important driver for the wholesale roaming costs is the mobile termination rate. So the wholesale cap consists of origination, termination, and transit. And the lack of convergence in the level of MTRs might create a risk of sustainable introduction of Roam Like at Home. This our preliminary findings show. We would like to know if you share BEREC's views on this issue and if you have any suggestions how this problem could be addressed in the future regulation. Coming to the retail fair use policy. The European Parliament proposed to establish a retail fair use policy for Roam Like at Home services, which was supported by BEREC already in May when publishing the comment on the European Parliament proposal. Because a fair use policy might limit the likely negative effects on the domestic market. The limits of the fair use policy, however, and their effects are strongly dependent on the wholesale roaming charges. So the higher the wholesale cap is, the lower the limits of the fair use policy should be if legislators want to avoid these negative effects on the domestic markets. Furthermore, BEREC considers that fair use policies could be set at minimum limits. That means operators would be allowed to have some flexibility in terms of implementation, but also some flexibility in offering more generous offers and to start competition on the level of the fair use policy. BEREC carried out several analyses with regards to the implementation of a fair use policy and identified several options, such as a limit in terms of time, which mean that consumers are allowed to use Roam Like at Home service for a specific number of days per year. Another option would be a limit in terms of volume. This might be a limit per month, a limit per year. It could be a percentage of the monthly allowance, etc. We would like to know from you if the options just mentioned are appropriate options and if there are any restrictions in terms of implementation of the fair use policy. The next part is about the timing for the introduction of Roam Like at Home. We already published in May that BEREC is concerned about the short periods currently foreseen in the regulation. We think that fair use policies and any adjustment in the wholesale market should be well known in advance before the implementation of Roam Like at Home. Here we also would like to know if you share the views of BEREC and how much time do operators exactly need to implement Roam Like at Home. So that means to adapt all the retail tariff schemes, to implement a fair use policy, etc. The last point is about the decoupling measures. BEREC considers that the obligation of the separate sale of retail roaming services, such as single IMSI and LBO, might lose its merits if legislators decide to abolish retail roaming charges. This effect and the possible abolition of these obligations, if they are no longer efficient or feasible, should be taken into account when amending the roaming regulation. Here we would also like to know on this issue if you share BEREC's views and what are the implications if they are withdrawn from the current regulation. The last slide is called discussions, but as Asta already said, the discussion will be postponed to the end of the session. I just want to mention one thing, that we welcome any written contributions also from your side. But because of the timing, as already said, BEREC is going to publish a BEREC opinion for public consultation in December. We would need any input within 1 week. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Claudi and Elisabeth. So the next speaker is Mr. Nick White, and he's representing International Telecommunications Users Group, INTUG. So the floor is yours, Mr. White.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I stand here as a somewhat battle-scarred veteran of 15 years conflict in the field of roaming, and must confess that perhaps we started it off when we began to publish the inconsistencies of international calls back in 1998 and 1999. I'm hoping that if we ever do reach a peace deal, I shall be able to retire. INTUG celebrates 40 years of existence this year, representing business users globally. We have permanent observer status at ITU, we're an expert group at OECD, and we have guest status at APECTEL. So for us, this is not a European issue. It is a global issue. One of the things I should say is that I'm setting this in the context of business users, but business users can be single device users, particularly if they're small and medium enterprises. But the key thing that I'd like to pick up, that this is not periodically travelling abroad, but for businesses it is permanently being abroad and moving around. Now, roaming, and I put this in quotes because it's a strange word which doesn't apply to any other key facility sectors, is part of a much bigger problem for business users, which is the unsatisfactory nature of the international mobile communications industry, which is built on national silos. And many of those bear the burden of an auction tax levied by its government that sat on the balance sheet of mobile operators. But we should bear in mind that users of wireless or mobile communications, for the most part, use unlicensed rather than licensed spectrum. But we are moving into an era when perhaps the actual mechanism of access may be unknown to the user. It's very much a converged world, but for the business user, there is no international competition in the provision of mobile services, and indeed until very recently there was no distinction between a single domestic retail user and a business user who might have tens of thousands of devices based in multiple countries, and now in the future millions of objects that are also using the service. So roaming, which I've described in the past as a disease of the mobile industry, is not simply a holiday inconvenience, but something that has inhibited business trade. I have my roaming turned off, as usual, as I stand here. And yet, it is a facility that is a key enabler for business processes, for businesses small and large. And there is an expectation that wherever a business user is, or wherever their object is, that there should be an ability to connect with the best available access infrastructure. So I would argue that roaming in quotes as a concept has become somewhat irrelevant and outdated. Interesting to note now that we have more countries, because organisations like Aeromobile, capitalising on the ability for you to use your mobile phone in an aeroplane, is defined as a country and has signed agreements to terminate, quotes, roaming charges between airlines and countries. So the future model for mobile is not simply about mobile phones, it's about pets, traffic control, sat-navs, supply chains, container vessels, aeroplanes and the rest. It's a very different environment to the bricks that we used to hold to our ears back in the 1990s. And so for operators, they're faced perhaps with a prospect of greater consolidation, perhaps internationally, more and more access sharing as the expense of rollout to very intensively used access networks grows in cost, and considering options such as a soft SIM option for enabling not just objects but people to connect to other networks than the ones that they're contracted to. It may be that the LBO and decoupling options are just a transitory phase as we move towards a longer-term solution in which roaming is no longer a concept. And this is one in which there would therefore be less capital expenditure for mobile operators and improved customer experience. And at last, regulators, you can stop having to regulate roaming because it won't exist anymore. The devices will continue to generate more and more capacity. They will be of all sorts of different natures and concepts and so on. And therefore, the challenge for the regulator may change into one of, do we need to distinguish between how we cope with what is being called roam like at home for a business market with thousands or even millions of devices and the controls that will be applied to that? How do you manage a fair usage policy for those sort of volumes? How do you analyse the market globally? Because as we began to drive down through retail price regulation roaming costs within the EU, what happened was that the operators began to use the waterbed effect to try and recover their lost revenue by increasing roaming costs outside the EU. We need to try and move towards a model, certainly within the EU, where it is possible for a business to ask for competitive bids for a pan-EU service from a number of operators able to deliver that service. So the price control era that we've lived through was a last resort before we finally eliminated the roaming problem altogether. This, of course, has to be underpinned by things like spectrum harmonisation and sharing and trying to balance the cost of spectrum more. Now, the problems highlighted by the previous presentation that I identified in BEREC's analysis alarm me, because it looks like the spectre of dilution and delay again, as began to happen with the Connected Continent proposals. Yes, indeed, it is involving things like termination rates, where we may still have a problem of great divergence between termination rates in different EU member states. Yes, it could create a problem of margin squeeze. Although, incidentally, it's worth noting, if you indirectly regulate a market that's no longer on the relevant market list, it doesn't matter, because the relevant market list is a minimum, not a maximum. And we were a bit concerned about losing Market 15 2 reviews ago. Yes, it does create problems of waterbed effects and so on. Timescale, well, I sort of thought we had a promise. Certainly Nelly Kroes thought we had a promise. We could tick the box, it would all be over by the end of 2015. Let's not abandon that target yet. So the future model for business users in the environment is that there is a huge opportunity, however you look at this, whichever industry it is, to use mobile communications, whether it be between people or objects, both in the public and the private sector, to improve the quality of life, to generate economic growth, to generate jobs, to improve safety and security and so on, through health and transport. For big and small companies, it's going to be in an environment of an Internet of Things with machine-to-machine communications. And this is the model that business users want to exploit. This is what we want to see the supply industry generate. What we're trying to optimize is the ecosystem that grows the whole economy, rather than looking just after the providers of mobile communications. So the long-term future model is borderless connectivity, the devices and the people not knowing that they've gone across an international border, wireless, whether it be mobile or stationary, connectivity everywhere at all times and in all places by the mechanism available, and that this model is global, not just the EU. We're not an island. Ultimately, we have to totally eliminate this brake on economic progress, and that is my message in looking for the future model for roaming. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. White. And our next speaker is Mr. Jacques Bonifay from EAFM, so the European Association of Full MVNOs. So please, the floor is yours.
How do you switch to? So good afternoon. I'm Jacques Bonifay. I'm the chair of the European Association of Full MVNO. I happen also to be the president of the French MVNO Association. And I'm president of Transatel, which is an MVNO in different countries. I don't know how you switch. Go to the next slide. Où ça? Comment je fais pour passer une autre slide? Ah, voilà. So, just as an introduction, MVNOs are important. If you don't believe that MVNO are important, then you don't need to listen to my presentation. It represents more or less 10% of the European market. And they have a role in this market. They have been the first, a few years ago, to bring, for example, a large data allowance to end user. They are addressing specific market with specific value-added services, such as a fixed mobile convergence offer, just for an SMEs, for example, to have the same voicemail for fixed telephony and mobile telephony. Thank you. I started to be a little bit embarrassed. You have some specific offers for elderly people, for example. There are some which are focusing on data usage, and I think you will see more and more of those data MVNO. I think also you will see some new services focusing on security. You might wonder that maybe GSM technology could replace Tetra technology. I think there's lots of things coming in. You have also some MVNOs which have been specialized in roaming. Actually, it's how I started Transatel, my company, 14 years ago. It was a roaming bypass solutions. Obviously, I've not been successful enough, but I'm still there. And also, if you look at from a business standpoint, the wholesale business for MNO is more profitable than the MVNO business. So why they don't make it bigger? It's just because MNO are afraid, and MVNO may destroy value by putting very low price on the market. That's why they keep it to not too big market share. But actually, it's a profitable business for mobile operators. Those are our members. Basically, all members are independent from MNO. They have invested in a core network to become full MVNO, so we do invest. And we come from different countries, and we feel that we represent the MVNO industry. We have nothing against roaming like at home. Actually, we quite like roaming like at home, and we have tried for some of us to develop such kind of offer. We like it provided it does not reduce competition, that we are not excluded from this business, and that it doesn't damage the end-user service. And we will be very happy to participate to this roaming like at home new evolution. Nevertheless, we have some major concerns with regulation which is coming. First, the European Commission does not take into account MVNO. So I know that we only represent 10% of market, but 10% is not that small. Actually, many MVNOs focusing on the low end of the market, meaning the people who don't have that much money. So I'm not sure it's really a good idea to forget those people. And no impact assessment has been done for MVNOs. There is an impact assessment somewhere, but it doesn't. There is no paragraph regarding MVNOs, and we have a problem with that. European Commission intends to regulate retail rate by imposing roaming like at home, but doing nothing with wholesale rate. So to regulate retail without regulate wholesale, I think it's just like if you are walking on only one leg. So something is wrong for us. So this is not consistent with some potential risk implied. As you know, there is some risk of competition distortion, waterbed effect. So you cannot do just a retail regulation. We are a little bit concerned also to see that the Italian presidency did not anticipate a review of the wholesale cap. And what it makes it worse for us is that there is that as an MVNO we have no bargaining power when we negotiate with mobile operators, because we don't have this bilateral, multilateral context, because we only buy and we most of the time only come from one country. So we are in a weaker position in terms of bargaining power. That's why if we impose roaming like at home, we will need to have a new wholesale cap, for, at least for us. We do agree with BEREC regarding the need of ability to offer roaming like at home for all providers and also for full MVNO, because once again, I think full MVNOs are not clearly stated, and yes, there may be problem for small operators, but the nature of the problem is slightly different for full MVNOs. Same thing for the sustainability. We do agree with BEREC, but we need the case of full MVNO to be addressed, and not only small operators. If there is no wholesale roaming charges review, then there are some impact. So we think that there is competitive distortions. So the first level of competitive distortion is that by definition you put the MVNO out of the market of roaming. So when you have some, and I think it's quite unfair, because MVNOs have been the first a few years ago to start to compete on roaming, to offer low roaming rates, and then we see that if there is no wholesale cap, then they are excluded from this business. Not only they are excluded from this business, but they may be excluded from the domestic market, especially if you look at MVNOs focusing on the low end of the market. That means they work with small margins. And then if they lose the part of the roaming business, which is in some country quite important, so you take a country like Belgium, where you have, even at the low end of the market, people do cross-border, then they could be excluded from the domestic market. And that's what I was implying. That may also generate a waterbed effect, because if you are an MVNO, and I think the impact is even stronger for MVNO than for MNOs. If you are an MVNO and you have a component of your cost, which is not decreasing when your revenues are decreasing, then if you want to be sustainable on the long term, you need to increase your price. So we have seen that the MVNOs have been price leader, usually, That means we won't be able to be price leader anymore, which is a waterbed effect. We had several discussions within the associations to propose a wholesale cap. I did not put the wholesale cap that we agree all together, maybe because I wanted to go back alive from France, because if some of the MNOs see the kind of wholesale cap we are thinking, they might dislike me slightly. Now, the wholesale cap we've been putting away are more or less in line with the wholesale rate that we have in our countries as MVNO. So we clearly see that the kind of rates we were thinking were quite different, whether you come from France, Poland, UK, Italy, etc. So there were some distortions. So nevertheless, we agree on the compromise, but we clearly see that the variation between the European countries is a problem. Arbitrage concerns, I think that has been stated by the BEREC before, but if the wholesale rates are too high, so basically if we remain at the level of 2014, it's a very good opportunity for the largest operator. The MVNO won't be able to really target the low end of the market by having roaming like at home. That means they will need to increase their price. And since part of them are focusing on the low end of the market, we will see actually poor people seeing their rates increasing so that rich people can travel and cross borders, which is not exactly what we want. And we will see that small operators, small MVNOs, which are investing for competitions, will be put out of the market, and large operators, multi-country operators, will remain. Now, permanent roaming, of course, it needs to be addressed with some kind of fair usage policy. The problem with fair usage policy is that it's costly, because then you need to implement very costly technical solutions. The decoupling measures that has been imposed recently has cost lots of money to the industry, MNOs, MVNO, and so on, for nothing. So I think we have to be careful to keep things simple, not to generate too much IT development cost, which is not very useful. This is a good introduction to this fair use slide. Of course, if we have good wholesale roaming rate, regulated wholesale roaming rate, which are more or less in line with local wholesale rate, yes, the MVNO will play a role and will be leader in proposing roaming like at home solutions. We are not convinced that detailed fair use policy is good things, because it will be bad for the transparency to the end user, and that will create all kinds of discussions between end user and the operators, and it will create some kind of distrust. And as I said, it will provide excessive cost in terms of IT development. And as I said several times now, some operators will need to increase their price to adapt. You can get in touch with us. We are happy to discuss with anyone and exchange.
Thank you a lot, Mr. Bonifay. And the next speaker is Mr. Jorge Morillo, and he's the Vice Chair of Operators Expert Group from GSMA. So please, the floor is yours, Mr. Morillo.
Good afternoon to everyone. I'm Jorge Morillo from Telefónica, but speaking for GSMA, representing the mobile industry. Thank you for this great event, although it's afternoon. Thank you. It's a good transparency exercise with stakeholders, and I'm happy to be here to share GSMA perspective on the future model of roaming, mainly roam like at home. That is what concerns in the near future. Our main concern on roam like at home, although there are several ones, is the entry into force of the regulation. Little certainty is something desired by the market, policymakers, customers, investors, companies, everyone. This is the fourth review since 2007. We had in 2007, 2009, 2012, and now we're on the way. In the last one, Roaming 3, In order to develop competition, we had new and costly obligations with no impact in the market. So we have to be careful. We desire legal certainty, and it's important for us. Just moving to Roam Like at Home. Roam Like at Home is a disruptive proposal. It has enormous complexities, it has enormous challenges and enormous impacts for those who has to implement it, mainly. Therefore, we need to know in advance, well in advance, what are the details to know how the implementation will look like and how much time it will take to implement it. So we're thinking, what's the period we need? Until we have the details, we don't know. But previously, we look back and we had 1 and 2 years when implementing local breakout and bill shock. It was far more easy obligations than the roaming like at home. Therefore, we don't like fast-track procedures, just rushing in 1 year or several months. And we need to avoid arbitrage. It's a major concern for our industry, and we need to look deeply the wholesale and retail markets, because Roam Like at Home is not known. We don't know the impacts. We need to think a lot about it and what is the implication. There's no need to do it in 6 months. Therefore, the date, December 2015, that the European Parliament proposed last April, it's unachievable. It's a political date, and we need to know all the parameters, all the definitions, before we know what do we have to implement and know what's the time we need to implement. Therefore, we need a reasonable period after we know those details. It's 12 to 18 months, and we consider not before mid-2017. As we say, this is not easy. I have one slide to show this is not easy. So we need to study, to think what are mainly. There are 4 impacts. Mainly, there's a technical impact. All the IT, the billing systems should be adapted. This is particularly expensive and time-consuming. This is not just about money, it's about time, and it takes time. It's commercial. We have deep portfolios in place. You have tariffs since 2 decades ago, they're in place. Should we adapt it to provide Roam Like at Home to someone who never travels? So the proposal to all new tariffs, all the tariffs, it's not reasonable, and we should look to something far easy, probably not the new ones, or I will develop that later. Legally, there are also some customer commitments, mainly with handset subsidies, and we could have a problem there. The introduction of Roam Like at Home in some countries may raise a concern. And obviously, when we have our retail domestic prices, we didn't know about Roam Like at Home. There's a cost in Roam Like at Home, and that's something we should consider. Our approach to Roam Like at Home, it's keep it simple. And we don't want a too prescriptive definition, because if it's too prescriptive, it will take more time, it will be far more complex. So why do apply to all tariffs? There are more reasonable options, maybe to new tariffs. And for example, in 2007, when the Euro tariff was introduced, it was introduced by default to new customers, new contracts, but not automatically to the existing customer database, the customer base. Although they always had the choice to get into that offer, and that was reasonable. Obviously, we want to avoid, with Roam Like at Home, another experience as the decoupling, the recent decoupling one, and we don't like that. Getting into the definition, for sure, a fair usage policy should be in place to avoid national market distortions. The fair usage policy should be flexible enough and defined at EU level, but consider local characteristics. There are big differences between one country and another. There are countries that travel a lot, and there are other countries that don't travel five times less than other countries. So, and of course, there's if the fair usage policy is limited, there's room for competition. If it's too ambitious, there will be no room for competition. The fair usage policy defined will take everything. So let's keep it simple to explain to customers, because what we decide here afterwards should be taken to the commercial portfolio. Let's keep it simple. We should explain, should be easy to understand. And of course, we want to have it to all tariff structures and easy to be tracked, the compliance. Commercial flexibility is also important for us. We are seeing in different countries more and more roaming offers, roaming like at home offers in Europe. There are countries with add-ons, with in-allowance roaming, and the competition is developing in this way. So it's important to give them room to evolve. Also, we want to have the ability to offer any commercial offer to non-roamers. And as said before, there are big differences between countries. And we have been exploring small daily fees with good and positive experience, increased usage in all services, and it has a good effect limiting the subsidies between roamers and non-roamers. Probably low-end customers subsidizing high-end customers. And the small daily fees has been positive, a positive experience. On the wholesale, at least we should recover our investments and costs, and we should take into consideration there are large differences in cost between the European countries when we decide what are the prices. Should prices be further reduced, the combination of a roam like at home obligation with wholesale roaming access obligation risks impacting competitive domestic markets, I mean arbitrage. On permanent roaming, another topic included in the preliminary analysis, operators should remain free to commercially deal permanent roaming in their bilateral negotiations, although permanent roaming should not be used as a regulated bypass for a domestic wholesale or MVNO business model. So don't disrupt national markets. And before any decision is taken, BEREC should demonstrate the proposals at wholesale level effectively mitigate the risks we have identified. And a robust impact assessment and consultation with stakeholders is obviously welcome. Consultation on the draft measures. This will make even more robust the analysis. Finally, as said before, don't forget about the two decoupling obligations that should be deleted because there is no room for them. It's nonsense if roam like at home is developed or introduced in the regulatory framework. And finally, my final remark goes to the cut-off facilities, the 50 euros cut-off facilities. It works. No need to develop new ones, ad hoc cut-off facilities. Every customer can choose what's their threshold. Keep it simple. Keep it simple. That works for everyone. And that's all. Thank you very much.